So for those of you that are familiar with myself or haven't met me before, my name's Nikara and I'm from Wildlands Conservation Trust, and today I'm just presenting a little bit on some very rudimentary research that we did on behalf of one of our partners, Quebec Bicycles, who essentially aim to mobilise people through the distribution of bicycles within communities around South Africa. And we've had a long-standing partnership with them, so they've approached us to do some research for them. So essentially just going to be very basic results and preliminary results of that study because it's ongoing at the moment. So for those of you that are not familiar about Wildlands or don't know what we do, we essentially have a very simple vision of a sustainable future for all. And we implement this through several community conservation projects that focus on sustainable natural resource use and the development of the green economy. The projects are implemented across several programs within Wildlands. These are those programs, but in terms of the presentation today, this is embedded in the Trees for Life and the Greening Your Future programs. More so the Trees for Life, but the Greening Your Future program is built into this. So to give you a geographical perspective of where Wildlands operates, all the little green circles are essentially projects where we are implementing some sort of work across those programs that I just mentioned. And the orange outline is just to show you where that MPAH hotspot, the Mapucheland, Pond and Albany hotspot is, where we were the RIT for the CEPF funding, so essentially where we were also had some sort of operational base. As you can see that our stronghold is within KZN, but we have expanded out into Gauteng, Mpumalanga, the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. So to give you some context in terms of the Quebec Wildlands Partnership, this was established in 2012 and it was based on our Wildlands tree barter model, and this partnership has grown significantly over the years in terms of the number of bicycles that get handed out within the communities where we work. And the partnership was based on achieving or fulfilling the needs of Quebec's mission, which is to uplift African communities by improving access to essential services such as education, healthcare, economic opportunity through the provision of bicycles. And essentially the partnership also fulfills our vision of a sustainable future for all. The table at the bottom is just giving you an indication of how the partnership has grown since it started in 2012, and in terms of you want to look at the middle column in terms of the number of bicycles that have been handed out. The very last row at the bottom is just an indication of bicycles that have been handed out up until the end of March of this year. Subsequent to that, there have been other handovers, and approximately another 600 bicycles have been handed out since then. So for those of you that are not familiar with our tree barter model, the process that we follow is that within the communities where we work, we have people who volunteer to grow trees for our restoration work that we implement in those areas. And essentially how that works is that those people are trained to identify indigenous tree species, and they are trained to grow and germinate these seeds, so they're taught how to collect the seeds and how to identify them. So sorry, I don't have a pointer, but essentially they collect the seeds and germinate those seeds, and for a period of time they are nurturing those trees, so they establish little nurseries within their homesteads until those trees are a certain size, is where we come in and we issue them a credit note. Depending on the size of their tree, it's to a certain value, and then these are bartered. The trees are essentially bartered for some form of livelihood support. So the focus today is specifically on the barter with bicycles, but barter items can vary, and this is very dependent on what is available from our donors and funders. Essentially then what happens is that the trees are taken to our holding nurseries and then are planted into restoration sites where we are implementing work through the Greening Your Future program. So what was the actual rationale behind doing or conducting the research that we undertook? And it was essentially Quebec who had approached us, and they had noticed that beneficiaries or tree-preneurs were receiving, in some cases, more than one bicycle. So they wanted to understand what value are these bicycles having within these communities or to these beneficiaries. And the way Wildlands has worked is that we always barter the items, but we never look further beyond what's actually happening with these items. So Quebec also wanted to understand how are these bicycles actually being used within these communities once the tree-preneurs receive them. And then they also wanted to understand if bicycles are contributing towards the development and growth within these communities where they're being distributed. So the method that we followed in terms of conducting the research, very simply, we designed a structured survey that consisted of 3 sections. The 3 sections being collecting some very basic demographic data, and then the participation of tree-preneurs within our program, and then how they're utilising the bicycles once they've received them. The questions were guided by a framework that Quebec had designed, and I'll take you through that in a minute. And the way that we went about that was just conducting very simple telephonic interviews, just in terms of time constraints and limitations. This was the easiest way. And in total, we managed to interview 96 participants, and those are only participants who had received bicycles between July of last year and March of this year. So, okay, don't worry about all the text and things. I'm going to go through it very simply with you. So this is the framework that Quebec had designed, and essentially, just to focus your attention, they had outlined some program results, which they had certain strategic objectives, and these are based on some intermediate results, and essentially that equates to outputs and activities. Each of these then has some form of monitoring indicator, and then there is a way of going about it or evaluating some sort of evaluation exercise. And these exercises are essentially a series of questions which form the basis of our survey that we put together. So the survey was essentially based on this, so we're answering, or feeding or collecting information exactly based on what Quebec is wanting to find out. So just to bring you back to this map, in terms of where the research was conducted or the area that was focused on, it was the Utungulu and Umkane-Gude district municipalities that we focused on in terms of the research that we did. But as I mentioned earlier, that we had subsequent handovers of bicycles in the last year, and those have been in Gauteng, in Durban, and in the Western Cape. So I'm going to inundate you with a couple of graphs now, just in terms of the results that we found. To give you an overview in terms of the demographics of the participants, majority of them were female adults, and we obviously tried to cover as many demographic groups as we could, but this is actually very reflective of our tree-preneur database. So majority of our tree-preneurs that are registered with us are female adults, so this is quite a good representation of that database. We asked the participants or the beneficiaries to rank their preferences in terms of the different barter items that are available to them. So many of these participants have been a part of the tree-preneur program for several years, and they've obviously bartered different items over the years, so we asked them to rank what they prefer. So I just want to focus your attention on the first preference, and Quebec bicycles essentially came up as the third most frequent wanted item in terms of first preference of the participants. This comes after building materials and, well, ShopRite or grocery vouchers that they've also received in the past. We found that those two, the building materials and ShopRite vouchers, are quite popular because people want to extend their houses because they have bigger families, and then in terms of groceries, it just gives them a little bit more freedom to purchase, or they have more options in terms of what they can actually get in return for their trees. But I think this is actually quite a good indication for Quebec in terms of that their bicycles are also quite popular and in demand or wanted within these communities. So we had to also ask the participants whether they had ever ridden a bicycle before, and interestingly enough, majority of them hadn't, yet they all bartered for bicycles. And I'm actually led to believe that this comes down to a cultural thing, that Zulu women don't necessarily ride bicycles within these communities. And but then this is also, it will be reflective in what actually happens to these bicycles once the recipients actually get these bicycles. So we'll see that as we're going along. So as I mentioned earlier, some of the participants receive more than one bicycle, and obviously that's dependent on how many trees they have. So if they want to barter all of their trees, then they're going to receive more than one bicycle in case of a barter. And as you can see, participants who received 6 or more bicycles all sold on their bicycles, whereas if they received between 1 to 5 bicycles, so in some cases they actually kept their bicycles. But then again, how many bicycles can one person ride? So they obviously have to do something with it. We also just wanted to evaluate at what cost are they selling them on for. So what are people purchasing them for? And majority of them are selling them on for over R1,000, which is about right in terms of how Quebec has evaluated or deemed a value on those bicycles. So in terms of this graph, this is how long have the participants been using their bicycles for. In many cases, they're selling on the bicycles to people that they know, so they know whether the bicycles are still functioning or operational within their communities. So majority have been using, the bikes have been utilised for over 12 months, and I know that this is based on people who have received bicycles only from last year, but they had obviously received bicycles prior in previous barters, so they are answering from that point of view. And majority of those bicycles, so the yes, no, and don't know, is whether they are still functioning or not. And again, reflective, I guess, good data for Quebec to see that the majority of their bicycles are still operational. And then we also wanted to understand the reason for whoever was buying the bicycles, what were they actually buying the bicycles for? What was their need for the bicycle? And the majority of people, like I mentioned before, they're selling on to people that they know or within their communities, and they would obviously be able to see or know what the buyer is using it for. A majority of those people are using it for some form of transport, whether it be to schools for children or to work or to specific amenities within their communities. And this speaks to Quebec's mission of giving people the opportunity to access different forms of really amenities and services within their community. So again, it's representative of that they are achieving their mission. So just some very rudimentary sort of conclusions that we've pulled out so far is that there is some sort of cultural significance behind bicycles, but there is still a use for them within these communities. So even though the majority of the people who are receiving bicycles are women, there is still some use within these communities because they see value in actually bartering these bicycles. And based on this, there is some indirect growth within these communities because it's allowing people to access services within their communities. And just the ability for them to sell on, they are creating some sort of local economic market within the communities that they're in. However, I do see that as our partnership with Quebec evolves over time, we probably need to look at a new innovative approach to how do we actually mobilize people on bicycles, because once a community becomes saturated with bicycles, what is the next option of trying to distribute bicycles within these communities, or how do you make it a product that people still want? And thank you.